Jewish. Now, of course, many of these Jews who were in these very, very large firms, and I could go through other firms and find some, they didn't advertise. They almost didn't appear. And the Jews that were hired by most of the major firms in the earlier days when I started and even before, were different than the Jews who exist in firms today. Today, you could go through almost any major elite firm, and you see the halls littered with people wearing kippahs. Our firm and other firms have a daily minyan, where they bench mincha and mariv, and it's a very different thing. But in the older days, the associates were not so visible in their Jewishness. They followed the patterns of some of the partners who practiced law, but there weren't many of us, and there wasn't much Jewish identity, and the partners were not noticeably observant or involved in Jewish organizational life. Things began to change. They began to change, I believe, in the 50s. I believe the change comes in response to competition. There was tremendous competition for business. There always was, there is now, and there always will be an effort to grow and an effort to prosper. I think the major firms, all of the major firms, almost without exception, but in different points of time, have reached out. And why did they do so? As a previous speaker mentioned, that the elite firms procured lawyers. The stuff of excellence of a law firm depends entirely on the quality of the people they hire and the lawyers who work. A sensible, great law firm with scions of wonderful families and the rich estates in this world would go out of business within a few years if they didn't hire people based entirely on the quality of their education and the excellence of their abilities. And the elite firms in the old days procured their associates from the elite law schools. As we all know, the elite law schools largely themselves practiced discrimination, and there weren't too many Jews in many of the elite law schools. And so I believe that the breakdown of barriers derives from competition and from the recognition that you can't preserve a decent professional organization without hiring the best you can, and that meant to include in the stable of people you hired. And the leading law firms today, some of the older names, have as their senior or managing partners, or their important partners, Jews. I could go down the list of 10 or 15 of them and identify in each of those firms, not excluding persons sitting at this table, who are Jewish and at the very top of all of the major firms. Then there were Jewish firms too at the time. We know the Proskauer firm, the Rosenman firm, some firms whose names are not so well known anymore, the Greenbaum, Wolf and Ernst firm, Moses and Singer, K. Scholler, Struck, they're both around still. Other Jewish firms that deserve mention, at least in the elitist aspect, I think would be Paul Weiss, which was not strictly speaking a Jewish firm, but had mostly Jews. Today, it probably still has mostly Jews, but not because it's a Jewish firm, but because, like most firms, they seek to hire and select the best people that they can find. And other Jewish firms were more specialized, many of them. They were specialized because some of the clients were becoming very rich Jews. As you know, many Jews became very successful. in banking, in finance, in real estate, in textile, and manufacturing. They tended to hire Jewish lawyers, and Jewish lawyers tended to represent them. And so the great real estate firms, Larry Wien had a firm, some of the great, some excellent lawyers who were lawyers went out and who left the law, but people like Larry Tisch and Jerry Speyer, Mort Zuckerman, Harry Helmsley, Sheldon Solo, it could go on and on. People who were lawyers who became successful businessmen, and they would hire lawyers, law firms, and many of them were Jewish. And then, as was earlier said, other Jewish people went into the practice of law and succeeded. And we may have a moment to talk about the subject of the plaintiff's bar versus the defendant's bar, the class action lawsuits, who are in it and who are not in it. The fact is that, yes, the plaintiff's bar is made up largely, at least in New York, of Jewish law firms, but the defendant's bar is also made up largely of Jewish law firms, and the terms of debate and discussion, I think, to some extent, go beyond religious identity. They enter into social attitudes and the opportunity to enter. There's very low barrier to entry. The entry-level barrier to become a plaintiff's lawyer is very low. And so people can get into it, and a lot of them are as excellent as anybody anywhere else in the world, and they prosper and they grow, and the major plaintiff's law firms today to be led by Jews. Special mention might be made of two firms who didn't begin as Jewish firms at all, and indeed aren't Jewish firms. One is my firm, Skadden Arps, which began only in 48 or 49. They were not a Jewish firm, but they had the wisdom to hire Joe Flom, a young Jewish boy from Brooklyn, born into poverty and who grew up in poverty, but managed to graduate from the Harvard Law School. And Flom defined the development of what is Skadden today, where we have more than 1,800 lawyers in about 30 countries, and are, I would say, in the rank of those firms that would be termed elitist or leading. Another firm for which special mention is due, which didn't start out as a Jewish firm, but Wachtel, Lipton, Rosen, and Katz, all Jews, didn't begin as a Jewish firm. They just began as four people who went to NYU and put together a law firm, which today is probably the preeminent merger and acquisition firm in the country. And they have, again, I would say, if you looked at their letterhead, mostly Jews, but not because they hire only Jews. It's the competition that defines it.